Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, but more specifically, we're going to discuss the Ether Bitcoin valuation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go to jump in. So, again, the reason we discuss Satoshi valuations of other cryptocurrencies is to understand the opportunity cost, right? If you think about the last year or so, Ether has gone up on its USD pair, but it's been going down on its Bitcoin pair. And that I think is very relevant. In fact, if you were to take a look at just how far Ether has fallen since the merge, it's now down 42.5% since the merge, right? Since the time when a lot of people were very, very bullish on Ethereum, calling for the flipping and all that stuff because it's deflationary tokenomics. Listen, guys, I understand what you're saying, and I do think the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation will eventually bounce back. But I also have been very, very clear for a long time that this was nothing more than a massive distribution phase. Okay, we talked about the similarities between Ether, Bitcoin. It's sort of the four peak first phase. You get your lull, and then you get another 1-2 distribution phase. This is the exact same thing we saw with Bitcoin on its USD pair back in 2021. And so now we find Ethereum having retraced all the way back down to the June 2022 low. So we need to take inventory on exactly what's going on and what are the ramifications if this level breaks. So the first thing I would say is if you look at the bull market support band for the Ether Bitcoin pair, you can see that it has guided it down for the most part since basically 2023 got started. You can see that we got below the bull market support band that very first month of 2023. And every time we get back up to it, we just hold it as resistance. Anytime we've gotten back above it, it tends to fall back below it the following week. So the Ether Bitcoin pair has essentially been below the bull market support band for the most part for the last year. And it's even extending its move below it. If you were to look at the short-term bubble risk, which just shows you the extension from the 20-week moving average, you can see that it's been getting further again away from the 20-week moving average compared to the last few weeks. This shows you basically again since January of 2023 that we've been below the bull market support band. We've been below the 20-week SMA. There was this brief week here in May of 2023 where we popped above it, but for the most part, it's been just lower highs and lower lows. And I think back to to the discussions I had with people. Calling it a discussion is one way to talk, one way to say it. But nothing ever has changed, right? So far it's been lower highs and lower lows, and I know that can be frustrating, right? Like if your portfolio is mostly ETH, I'm sure it's been frustrating for a long time to see this price action because you're probably sitting there thinking like, well, why is it doing this? You have the deflationary aspect. You have, you have the proof of stake and whatnot. And I mean, to be honest, none of that's necessarily proven yet in terms of long-term viability. But in the short term, this was always the most likely outcome just based on where we are within the business cycle. One of the things that I like to look at with Ethereum is the 20-month moving average for the Ether Bitcoin pair. This is something we actually spoke a lot about back in the last cycle. And you can see that once the 20-month SMA broke right here, we did not get back above it for 2 years in any durable way, right? It took exactly 24 months. And you can also see in the same way that there was a fake out below the 20-month SMA right there, there was also one over here as well. So, and by the way, that fake out below the 20-month moving average is what ultimately led to this wick, which once broken below led to a lot of interesting developments in the cryptoverse. So it's fascinating how history has been repeating itself. You have your fake out below the 20-month moving average. You set your wick that then will be targeted for the next year and a half. You did the same thing over here, right? You go below that 20-month moving average. You set the wick that everyone's been watching for the last year and a half or so. And what's fascinating is, again, if you were to look out how many months it's been about 19 months since that, or back then it took 19 months to break down from that level. And currently we are in month 19, right? It's eerily similar, okay? 19 months later, ETH Bitcoin broke down in the summer of 2019. And you have to wonder if, are we doing the exact same thing here 19 months later? Now, of course, everyone's going to, say that it's because of the SPOT ETF for Bitcoin, whatever, right? Whatever. The point is that this is the very similar way that it played out last cycle. And also it's very similar in terms of monetary policy and interest rates, and seeing that Ether Bitcoin broke down here, right? It broke this level, right? Just before rate cuts arrived. And then once rate cuts arrived, Ether Bitcoin finally found a bottom, right? And again, we're probably going to be getting rate cuts, I don't know, maybe by March. It's really hard to say. I mean, the probabilities are changing all the time. March is the most likely outcome right now. Could always be May. Probably not going to be January at this point, but it could be March or May. And so, would it be that surprising if Ether Bitcoin, eventually fell below this support level? I don't think it would be that surprising. And what's interesting is you can see that once it fell below the support level in 2019, it then found its bottom 2 months later, okay, in September of 2019. Now, might be interesting to note that 2 months, if we were to break this in January, 2 months later would in fact be March, which, by the way, would correspond to the first potential rate cut. And that's exactly when it bottomed out last cycle on those first rate cuts. So I can't help but think it's playing out in a very similar manner, right? I think it's a very similar type of move, and we should be prepared for it. The other reason why this is highly relevant to follow is I know a lot of people don't necessarily care about Bitcoin valuations because they just want to focus on USD valuations. So I will say, and again, it doesn't have to play out the exact same way, but I will say that one reason why you should be interested in the Bitcoin valuation, even if you're not normally interested in it, is because if you look back to last cycle, this is the Ether Bitcoin valuation right here. When it broke down, that's ultimately what marked that sort of that mid-cycle top on Ether USD. So if you were to look at this week right here, that was that local top on Ether USD once Ether Bitcoin broke support. So once Ether Bitcoin broke below support, that marked that local high for Ethereum. So again, we've shown the similarities before, and you have to wonder, is the same thing about to play out again, right? Like, are we going to mark some type of local high? And it's funny because it looks like a really similar pattern as well, where you're putting in these, these higher highs. You're also putting in these higher lows, but the slope of the higher lows is more aggressive than the higher highs, and kind of a similar thing over here. And are we just sort of repeating that same type of pattern where, yes, if Bitcoin goes up on its USD pair, it can lead to Ethereum going up, but it doesn't mean that Ethereum is immune to going down on its USD pair whenever Bitcoin has a correction. And the danger for Ethereum is that if Bitcoin stays strong enough, long enough, then it will likely break Ether off support. Now, if support breaks, where are we likely going to go? And how long would it take to get back above this level if history were to continue to repeat itself? Well, if we look closely at how long it took once support broke back over here, it's not you're not going to like the sound of it necessarily, but it took about a year to durably break back above. You can see that we fell below right here in July of 2019, and while we did get back above it in February, so about a little over half a year later, we did not durably get back above that level until May of 2020. So it took about 10 months or so, about 10 months. And so I wonder if something like that will play out again, where you get a move below it. And because I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking that the minute it goes below it, it'll just go back up and that'll be it. But this period over here could be quite painful for a while, because this actually marked the transition, as we just showed, right? This marked the transition from Ether USD being in that local uptrend to Ether USD being in that local downtrend. So that is what we're watching. That's what I'm watching. And I imagine, because if you're watching this channel, you're also probably interested in the Ether Bitcoin pair. So what are some levels to look at if it breaks? Like if it were to break down, what would be some of those levels to look at? The way that I think about it is, I don't really care too much about the wicks, but if you were to go look at like a line chart and just look at where these prior moves came to, I think 0.043 could be a relevant area to watch. And then below that, you have about 0.037. Maybe it's, slightly below 0.037. That would be the next area. And then below that, I mean, who really knows? I mean, it could go all the way, you could go all the way down to less than 0.03. I would say that, for me, assuming that it plays out in a similar manner, which is my baseline expectation, I don't really think we'll have any trouble reaching this milestone. My goal is for it, and what I think is the most likely outcome is for it to reach this level here. Okay, that has been my target. I've said between 0.03 to 0.04 for a long time. This is basically right in between. It's slightly above the midpoint, around 0.037. I do think that's possible. Okay, not really sure about this one, right? Down here it might be getting, too greedy. And some people would say that, anything below the current valuation they might say it's too greedy. But again, while there have been a lot of people that have constantly tried calling the bottom on this, it just keeps on going lower, and I don't really think there's a compelling reason for the trend to change until we go back to looser monetary policy, because again, looser monetary policy is exactly what it took last cycle for the trend to ultimately change. So I have to keep going back to this idea of, until we go back to lower rates, why should the trend change? Now, again, if you look at weekly candles and weekly closes and not just those wicks, you can see that we took out the June low, the June 2022 low, long ago. And I've actually been quite vocal about this on the Bitcoin dominance videos as well. But the essentially, I know a lot of people are looking at this wick, and I do think it's relevant, because once we broke below that level, assuming that we do, I think it changes sort of the where we are in the cycle when assuming that this breaks. But I would also point out that there's a pretty big difference between this and then what's happening right now, because what's happening right now is we're spending a lot of time at these levels. Over here, it was just a wick. To get down to this level over here, it was basically just an outright capitulation, and then we went right all the way back up. The problem this time is that it's been, people have tried, right? The Ether bulls, the Ether Bitcoin bulls have tried really hard, and every single time it has just led to a lower high. You can't say they didn't try, right? I mean, they've been trying a lot. I think the problem is there's so much structure up here There's so many levels that would theoretically act as resistance, and without a change in monetary policy, I don't think Ethereum has the juice to make that gain on Bitcoin in any durable manner. Now, I'm not saying it can't ever bounce, and if it does bounce, the bull market support band is what you would look towards, and that's currently at around 0.055. So I would keep an eye on that in case there are any bounces. But I still think that there's a good chance that we are just emulating what happened over here, and that we are about to enter this phase of the cycle, right? Where support finally breaks, it comes down into these levels over here, finds some type of a bottom, goes sideways for a while, and then maybe by the end of the year starts trending back up. That, I think, is a reasonable way to look at the market. Now, while that is a reasonable way to look at the market, it doesn't mean that it has to play out like that. There's all sorts of different ways that it could theoretically play out, but I have outlined before that if you think about, drawing a curve and how best to explain Ether Bitcoin higher lows is perhaps on some type of logarithmic regression curve. And it is important to point out the higher lows, which everyone on Twitter or on X likes to point out these higher lows. But one concerning aspect are these lower highs, right? So we can look at the higher lows, and a lot of people point to that, but I was bullish on the Ether Bitcoin pair back in 2019 and 2020, right? I mean, I was bullish on it back then. So I don't really see that as being sort of like a gotcha moment. I look at these lower highs and think, well, where's this thing ultimately heading? It's putting in lower highs, but it's also putting in higher lows. The truth is, I don't know what the ultimate outcome of this is. You could make a case either way. My argument is that even though I don't know the eventual outcome of the higher low versus lower high scenario, what I would say is that whether we break these highs, whether we put in a higher high eventually or whether we put in a lower low eventually, I think that you have to come back down and visit this area right here. And from there, we will figure out what's what and who's who in the cryptoverse. Because if it can't hold here and it comes back down to this level, then you start to wonder, is it an oscillator at best? If it holds this level and then breaks back up, say early 2025, then the game's still going, and there's a chance that it might deviate outside of these bounds. If you want my honest opinion at the current time, which is subject to change, I think that Ether Bitcoin is sort of honing in on whatever the fair value is, right? So, in the very first cycle, it got way overheated and way overvalued. Ethereum's valuation at 0.15, 0.16 was extremely overvalued. And I don't necessarily think that, these levels, while I think were overvalued, you can see that it hasn't been as obvious to market participants, as it's been a much slower bleed than what happened over here. So I would be really interested to see if Ethereum's valuation against Bitcoin does fall back into the 0.03 to 0.04 range. I'd like to see the reaction in that area, because that's ultimately what I sort of view as the most likely outcome. To go back to earlier when we were talking about the 20-month moving average, that's currently at 0.06467. And remember, last time it took 2 years, right? 2 years to break back above it in any durable way. For reference, it's only been 12 months, right? We're only at 12 months right now. And by the way, the 12-month mark over here corresponded to the month where Ether Bitcoin broke down. It was that 12th month, right? So we're in the 12th month now from breakdown from that 20-month moving average. So we're in month 12, just like we were over here. It broke down just before rate cuts arrived. When it broke down, it marked the local top on ETH USD. Okay, so there's a reasonable chance that if Ether Bitcoin breaks down in January, that could mark the local high on Ether USD for a while. And so if it does break down, then I would look for something like this, right? Where you get that initial monthly close below the 0.049 level. Here it was just below it, right? But a little bit below it. Look for a monthly close, maybe 0.046, 0.047. I don't know where exactly, but somewhere in that area, and then look to see if February extends it, right? If February extends that loss, and then by March, April timeframe, it's trying to find that low, just like it did back over here. So that's what I'm looking at the current time. I do hope that these videos on the Ether Bitcoin pair have been useful in terms of understanding opportunity costs in the cryptoverse. I get that Ethereum is up on its USD pair since the merge. The problem is that, again, and the Bitcoin dominance videos have covered this in great detail. The problem for Ethereum is that, well, congratulations, it's up on its USD pair, but so what? I mean, it's down 42, for almost 43% against Bitcoin. I've seen a lot of people tell me on YouTube and on Twitter, and it just goes on and on and on about how Ethereum outperforms Bitcoin in the bull run. And I keep going back to this idea of, they're thinking of this type of bull run that came after QE returned, when quantitative easing was here. They're thinking of that type of bull run. But what they're, I think, missing is that there's other types. If I can, let me switch this to a log scale here, right? There's other types where you get these major moves up by Bitcoin, but they tend to top out, right? They tend to top out just before rate cuts arrive. So a lot of people say, well, Ethereum outperforms Bitcoin in the bull run, but they're looking at a QE bull run, right? At a quantitative easing bull run where the Fed is printing money, okay? They're not looking at a late business cycle bull run where you're basically looking at higher and higher interest rates, and then you reach the terminal rate, and then a lot of altcoins are basically bleeding back to Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin is just going higher and then potentially topping out before that first rate cut arrives. So that's, I think, the sort of the disconnect, is saying that it outperforms Bitcoin. Well, that's great and all, but in order for it to really do that durably, I think we need to go back to looser monetary policy, more favorable monetary policy. And because we're not there yet, we're in this type of a move where it just bleeds against Bitcoin until that looser monetary policy arrives. So, those are my views on Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation. Some of the other things that, we've looked at previously are, and this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about last year. But if you were to look at quarterly returns for the Ethereum Bitcoin pair last year, it was red every single quarter. Red every single quarter. This is, negative 11.5%, negative 0.8%, negative 2%, negative 13%, right? So every single quarter last year, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation went down. And, I keep seeing a lot of people say, well, it's holding up well, it's holding up well. I mean, yes, you can say that, but it's been bleeding basically since the merge. If you were to look at monthly Heikin-Ashi candles, you can see we haven't had a green one since December of 2022. So it's been a long time. And it really has been a long time since Ethereum saw any type of durable bullishness against Bitcoin. And again, it was at the merge when that changed, just after the merge. I mean, Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation topped out the month of the merge on this sort of the secondary top. So going back to quarterly returns, I mean, you can see that it was red. And then if you look at monthly returns, you'll see, if we go look at Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation. So we're going to look at the Ether Bitcoin pair. We talked last year about how we would likely spend from June to December mostly red with a couple of green months, just like 2019. That played out. Now we're in 2024, not getting off to a great start, arguably because of all the momentum that Bitcoin has right now. And when Bitcoin has a lot of momentum, a lot of the rest of the market just can't keep up. And so that's, that has been the issue for Ethereum. And so, I'm interested to see how 2024 will sort of shape out. I do think that the things that will happen this year, I think we will get rate cuts, and I think that Ether will find a bottom against Bitcoin. That'll probably happen in 2024. And I know, that might not sound like a very bold thing to say, but again, everyone was calling the bottom on Ether Bitcoin throughout all of 2023, and it's putting in new lows today. Again, at least going all the way back to June of 2022, putting in new lows, new 52-week lows, if you will. So it probably will find a bottom in 2024, but I think that it'll find that bottom around rate cuts. And I still think we're a little bit off from that time. And so for that reason, I think Ether Bitcoin will continue to show weakness. So those are my views on the market. I'm looking for Ethereum to break down against Bitcoin here relatively soon, and then to spend the next couple of months sort of figuring out where that bottom actually is, trying to hold that level for maybe 4 to 6 months, and then if it can, going back into another uptrend as we get into 2025. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. And again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. See you guys next time. Bye.